At 4:18 on a February morning in 1982, a Minnesota hog farmer carried a 2-pound runt into his kitchen after the vet had already marked it as a loss. The vet was right about the odds. The feed salesman was right about the cost. His own son said the same word twice. Cull it. But 12 years later, that pig's daughters were the reason 3 farms in Kandiyohi County still had sow herds, when their neighbors had already sold out. The farmer's name was Art Havel. He was 59 years old, broad across the shoulders in the way men get from lifting feed sacks before breakfast, with hands so cracked by winter that the skin at the knuckles never fully healed until June. He and his wife Clara ran 220 acres outside Atwater, Minnesota. Corn, oats, a little alfalfa, and a farrow-to-finish hog operation built by Art's father in the late 1940s out of block, timber, and whatever could be bought cheap after the war. The farrowing house sat north of the machine shed, where the wind hit it first. On the morning the runt was born, that wind had found every crack. Sow was a heavy red cross Art had bought as a bread gilt the year before. She had delivered 13 pigs before dawn. 12 were ordinary enough to make a farmer relax. They were loud, hungry, square-backed, and already fighting for the best places under the sow. The 13th one was not ordinary. It came late. It came cold. It came small enough that Art first thought it was already dead. When he lifted it from the straw, it made one short breath against his palm. That was all. Art waited on the old hanging scale by the feed-room door. 2 pounds, 6 ounces. The rest of the litter averaged a little over 6. Number in his breeding notebook, because that was what his father had taught him to do. Write it down before you decide what it means. At 6:30 that morning, Art called Dr. Leonard Pike, the large animal vet out of Wilmer. Pike had been on more farms than most men had been inside grocery stores. He was careful, clean, and not cruel. He was also tired of watching farmers spend good labor on bad odds and call it hope. He arrived a little after 7, pulled on rubber gloves in the doorway, and looked over the litter. The 12 strong pigs were easy. The runt took him longer. He checked the mouth, the ribs, the joints. Watched the pig try to stand. It pushed one front foot into the straw, lifted itself half an inch, and fell sideways under the belly of a littermate twice its size. Pike stood, wiped his glove on a rag, and gave Art the answer a man gives when he believes kindness is speed. Don't carry this one. Art looked at the pig, not at the vet. Pike went on. She's too far behind. She won't compete. If she lives, she'll burn labor and milk replacer, and a female starting this poor is not breeding stock. You know that. Art did know that. Every farmer knew the arithmetic. Art did know that. Every farmer knew the arithmetic. A pig that small had 3 disadvantages before breakfast. No place at the udder, no warmth under the pile, and no reserve in its body to wait for a better chance. Pike closed his bag. "You've got 12 good ones," he said. "Put your time there." He left before 8. Art stayed in the farrowing house until the truck was gone. The runt had reached the sow twice in that hour. Twice the stronger pigs had pushed her off. The second time she did not even squeal. She lay in the straw and shivered, as if the fight had already gone out of her. Art had seen that look in animals before. He had seen it in a calf caught in wire in 1964. He had seen it in a ewe lamb after an ice storm in 1951. He had seen it once in his own father, sitting at the kitchen table after a bankman told him what the farm was worth on paper. Art went to the house and came back with a bushel basket, an old bath towel, a feed sack, and the small brown bottle Clara kept in the pantry for orphan lambs. Clara watched him carry the basket through the back door. She did not ask what the vet had said. She already knew by the way Art set the basket near the cook stove and reached for the thermometer. For the next 9 days, the kitchen clock ran the farm. Every 3 hours, Art warmed milk in a coffee cup, tested it on his wrist, and fed the pig 1 ounce at a time. The runt did not suck well at first. She mouthed the nipple, swallowed wrong, coughed, and stopped. Art learned to hold her upright against his shirt with 2 fingers under her jaw so she would not drown in what was supposed to save her. By the second night, Clara had stopped pretending she was asleep when the alarm rang. She would swing her feet to the cold linoleum, put another stick of wood in the stove, and set the milk cup in a pan of warm water without saying much of anything. That was Clara's way. If she believed in a thing, she made it easier. If she doubted it, she made coffee and waited to be convinced. On the 5th day, Art's oldest son Dennis came by after hauling feed to Raymond. Dennis was 31, sharp-minded, college-trained, and proud of the new confinement barns he had helped design for a neighbor. He had numbers on everything: gain, conversion, labor, death loss, square footage, heat cost. He saw the basket by the stove and did not bother hiding what he thought. "Dad," he said, "tell me you're not keeping that thing in the kitchen." Art was standing at the sink, rinsing the bottle. "She was cold," he said. "She's a runt." She was cold. Dennis stepped closer and looked into the basket. The pig lay in the towel, her ears folded flat, her ribs moving too fast. "The vet tell you to put her down?" Art set the bottle upside down on the dish rack. Said she was a bad bet. That means yes. It means what he said. Dennis gave a short laugh, but it had no humor in it. "You're losing sleep for a pig that won't wean right? Even if she makes it, what are you going to do with her? Breed her? Sell her as a story?" Art wiped his hands on his pants. "I'm going to feed her at noon," he he said. Dennis looked at Clara, expecting help. Clara was peeling potatoes at the table. She did not look up. "Heard you," Dennis said. "I'm just telling you the truth." Art nodded. That was one of his habits. He nodded when a man had finished giving him a truth that was too early to be useful. By the second week, the story had left the farm. Sorensen heard it at the Atwater feed mill and came by with a cracked pulley he wanted Art to weld. Milt had 160 sows and the kind of practical mind that made sentiment uncomfortable. He looked into the basket, lowered his voice, and said, "Pike doesn't miss many." "No," Art said, "he doesn't." "You keeping records on what this cost you?" "Yes." That surprised Milt. "You are?" Art pointed to the black notebook on the sideboard. Milt opened it. Every feeding was written down: time, amount, temperature, stool, movement, weight, every other day. Milt read 3 lines, closed the notebook, and looked at Art differently. "You're either stubborn," he said, "or you know something I don't." Art took the notebook back. "I'm waiting to find out which." That was the first honest sentence anyone had said about the pig. On day 16, the runt weighed 3 pounds even. That number should not have mattered, but it did. Art wrote it down, underlined it once, and held the pencil over the page longer than he needed to. 3 pounds was not a victory. It was not even safety. But it meant the pig had put something on, instead of giving something away. Clara saw the underline. She put a clean towel in the basket. The hard part came 3 nights later. A wet snow had turned to sleet against the windows, and the farrowing house roof ticked all evening as the temperature dropped. At 11:40, when Art reached into the basket for the feeding, the pig did not lift her head. Her skin was hot. Her belly was loose. The towel underneath her was fouled. Art swore once, quietly, because farmers who do not swear loudly still swear honestly when an animal starts slipping between feedings. He cleaned her, warmed the towel, mixed electrolytes, and sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low. She would not take the nipple. At midnight, Clara stood in the doorway in her robe. "Art," she said. He did not look up. "Art." This time he did. Clara's face was tired enough that it had no room for politeness. "Are you trying to keep her alive?" she asked. "Or are you trying to make the men wrong?" That sentence found him. Not because it was cruel, because it was clean. He looked down at the pig in the towel, then at the notebook open beside his elbow. He had told himself he was only watching the animal, but there was pride in it too. There was the vet's voice, Dennis's voice, Milt's voice. Old pressure every farmer knows. If you make a lonely decision, you start wanting the world to lose. Art closed the notebook. For a minute, the room was so quiet he could hear the sleet hitting the stovepipe. Then he remembered his father in the winter of 1951. Art had been 28 then, newly married, and still young enough to think hard decisions came with a sign over them. A ewe lamb had been born in an ice storm so weak that the neighbors said nature had already voted. Art's father had carried it into the milk room, set it by the oil heater, and worked on it for 2 days. The lamb lived, not because it was strong at birth, because somebody gave it enough conditions for strength to show. Later, when Art asked how his father had known, the old man had said, "The scale tells you the start. It does not get to tell you the finish." Art had written that line inside the cover of his first breeding notebook. He had not thought about it in years. Now he opened the notebook to the first page and read it again. The scale tells you the start. It does not get to tell you the finish. He looked at Clara. "You're right to ask," he said. She waited. "I'm not keeping her to beat them," he said. "I'm keeping her because she still tries when I give her a chance." Clara looked at the pig. Then she walked to the stove, warmed the electrolyte cup, and set it beside him. "All right," she said. "Then feed what's in front of you." That night, Art got half a teaspoon into the pig at a time. Half a teaspoon, then wait. Half a teaspoon, then wait. By dawn, she had swallowed enough to still be present in the world. By the next evening, she lifted her head. By day 21, she bit the nipple hard enough to leave a crease in the rubber. Art laughed once when it happened. Clara heard it from the pantry and smiled where he could not see her. They named the pig Cricket, because Clara said anything that small making that much noise deserved a name that did not pretend to be grand. Cricket moved out of the kitchen at 5 weeks, not because she was large, but because she had become inconveniently alive. Art built a small pen in the feed room off the farrowing house, where she could see the other pigs without being buried by them. He hung a heat lamp low, bedded the corner deep, and set feed where only she could reach it. By 8 weeks, she was still smaller than the rest of her litter, but she was no longer fragile. That was the distinction Art cared about. Fragile animals moved like every choice was an accident. Cricket moved as if she was choosing exactly where to place each foot. She was narrow through the hip, but clean on her legs. Her appetite was steady. Her ears lifted at every sound. When Art entered the pen, she did not scatter or panic. She watched him with a kind of bright attention that made him uneasy until he understood why. She was measuring everything. At 3 months, Dennis stopped by again. This time, he did not make the first joke. Cricket stood at the feeder, shoulder deep and square for her size, eating with a focus that was almost rude. Dennis leaned on the gate. "That's the runt?" "That's her." "She's still small." "Yes." "But not sick." "No." Dennis waited then said, "Doesn't prove she'll be worth keeping." Art opened the gate and stepped into the pen with a bucket. Cricket backed up just enough to let him pass, and then returned to the feeder. "No," Art said. "She was worth not deciding too early." Dennis looked at him. That was the first time the argument changed shape. By late summer, people stopped laughing and started inspecting. A feed salesman named Ron Kessler came out to talk about soybean meal prices and ended up crouched by Cricket's pen for 10 minutes, saying little. Milt Sorensen came back with a reason he had clearly invented, then stood by the gate with both hands on the top rail. "She's got a good foot under her," Milt said. Art said, "Yes." "Good disposition, too." "Yes." Milt took his cap off, put it back on, and said, "You going to breed her?" "I am." Milt gave him a look. "To what?" Art told him. "An ordinary Yorkshire boar from a farm west of Spicer. Not fancy, but consistent." Milt looked disappointed. He had expected Art to choose some famous line and turn the whole thing into a gamble. But Art was not trying to make a miracle. He was trying to find out what was real. The first breeding took in November. Through the winter of 1983, Cricket carried like a sow twice her size. She did not go off feed. She did not sour in the shoulders. She did not chew the rails or fight the pen or turn nervous when the barn got loud. Art wrote all of it down. By then, Dennis had begun asking different questions, not gentle questions. Dennis was not built that way. "What's her feed intake compared to the others?" "Lower." "How much lower?" "Enough to write." "You keeping temperature notes?" "Yes." "Litter history on the boar?" "Yes." Dennis took the notebook one Sunday after dinner and read it for 20 minutes without speaking. When he handed it back, he did not apologize. He said, "If she farrows clean, you should weigh every pig." Art said, "I was going to." That was as close as father and son came to agreement in those years. Cricket farrowed on March 6, 1983. Art slept in the farrowing house that night on 2 feed sacks and an old army blanket. The barn was quiet, except for the small animal sounds that make a farmer lie very still. At 2:12 in the morning, the first pig arrived, then the second, then the third. By sunrise, there were 14 live pigs under the heat lamp. None under 2.5 pounds. None pushed out from the row. None with the scattered look of weakness Art had learned to recognize long before language ever got near it. Clara came to the door at 7 with a thermos. Art stood by the pen, holding the notebook. "How many?" she asked. 14. "All alive?" "Yes." She stepped into the doorway and looked over the rail. The sow lay calm, broad enough now that the old word runt seemed like an insult to everybody who had ever used it. Clara handed Art the thermos. "She finished telling them," she said. Art did not ask who she meant. The second proof came from the pigs themselves. At weaning, The litter was unusually even, not just heavy, even. That was the thing farmers noticed first when Art hauled 3 gilts to the Candy-Ojai County Fair that August. Evenness meant less fighting. Less fighting meant less lost feed. Less lost feed meant less time fixing problems that never should have started. A man who does not raise hogs sees only a pen full of animals. A hog farmer sees where the money leaks out. At the fair, Art did not enter Cricket herself. She was already bred back and too valuable to haul for applause. He entered 3 of her gilts in the breeding class. A young judge from the University of Minnesota Extension Office spent longer with those gilts than anyone expected. He looked at their feet, top line, chest, spacing, and temperament. He asked for their birth weights. Art handed him a copy of the records. The judge read them once, then again. "Same dam?" he asked. "Yes." "What was her birth weight?" Art told him. The judge looked up. "That can't be right." Art said nothing. The judge looked at the paper again, because paper makes people braver when the truth on it bothers them. 2 days after the fair, the extension judge called. A week after that, a man from a regional breeding stock company in Mankato called. The call was polite in the way money is polite when it wants to enter a farmhouse without taking off its boots. The man asked whether Art would consider selling Cricket outright. Art said no before the man finished the sentence. The offer grew over the next month. First it was enough to buy a used grinder mixer, then enough to pay down the operating note, then enough that Clara set the envelope on the kitchen table and looked at it for a full minute before sliding it back to Art. "That is real money," she said. "Yes," Art said. "You still saying no?" "Yes," she nodded. Not because the money was small, because she had watched the animal become more than money. What Art finally agreed to was not a sale. It was a record-sharing and breeding agreement with 3 farms he trusted and the company observing from the side. Cricket stayed on Art's farm. Art controlled the matings. Every litter was weighed, marked, tracked, and written into notebooks by hand before any copy went to men with typed forms. Dennis told him he was leaving money on the table. Art said, "I know." "Then why leave it there?" Art looked toward the farrowing house. "Because when a thing teaches you how to see, you do not sell it to a man who only wants the result." Dennis did not answer, but he wrote that sentence down later. Art found it years afterward in a ledger Dennis kept in his own office. The results over the next 5 years made the old argument impossible to keep alive. Cricket's first 4 litters averaged more live pigs than Art's farm average, and fewer losses before weaning. Her daughters were not all perfect. No honest breeder talks that way. Some were ordinary. 1 was mean and got sold. 2 washed out. But enough of them carried the same steady appetite, strong feet, calm handling, and even litters that farmers began asking for cricket line gilts before Art had any to spare. Milt Sorensen bred 2 sows to a cricket-line boar in 1985. The next spring he drove over without calling first. Art was fixing a waterer in the nursery. Milt stood in the doorway and said, "I was wrong." Art tightened the fitting, wiped his hand on a rag, and waited. Milt continued, because once a man has carried a sentence across several miles, he usually wants to set it down whole. "I thought you were being soft," he said, "back when she was in that basket. I thought Pike was right, Dennis was right, and you were letting your heart spend your feed." Art leaned back on his heels. "You said what made sense." "That's the problem," Milt said. "It made sense too soon." Art looked at him then. Milt shook his head. "Those 2 gilts of mine out of that line are the best mothers I've had in 10 years. He did not say thank you. Farmers often do not, when thank you is too small for what has changed. He said, "If you have another bred gilt next fall, I want first chance." Art said, "I'll write it down." By 1988, the story was no longer about one pig. That summer burned the county brown. Corn curled before tassel. Pastures faded early. Feed costs made men sit longer at kitchen tables than was healthy for their marriages. Smaller hog operators began selling sows because the numbers looked hard and simple. Too hard, too simple. Art felt the pressure like everyone else. A good farmer is not spared arithmetic because he has convictions, but his sow herd held better than most. The cricket-line females did not solve the drought. Nothing solved that. They simply wasted less of what was scarce. They stayed on feed. They held condition. They mothered calmly through heat that made ordinary animals short-tempered and careless. They weaned enough pigs that Art could make ugly numbers work. 3 other farms told him the same. That was when Dennis finally understood the shape of it. Not emotionally, structurally. He came to the farm one evening in September, took his cap off at the kitchen table, and set a yellow pad beside Art's notebook. "I ran it," he said. Art did not ask what. Dennis tapped the pad. "If you had sold her in 1983, even at the top offer, you would have done fine that year. But you would have lost more than that in production difference by now, just on retained females." Art poured coffee. Dennis looked embarrassed by his own conclusion, which made Art kinder than usual. "Money can be right," Art said, "and still be too small." Dennis nodded once. That was the apology. Art accepted it without making him say it. Dr. Pike retired in 1990. The county extension office held a small gathering in the back room of a supper club outside Wilmer. There were sandwiches, coffee, a sheet cake, and 30 farmers pretending they had not been difficult patients for 3 decades. Art went because Pike had earned it. Near the end, the 2 men stood by the coat rack while the room thinned. Pike looked older than Art expected. Not weak, just more honest in the face. I have thought about that little guilt of yours, Pike said. Art held his coffee with both hands. I imagine you have, he said. Pike smiled faintly. I gave you the right recommendation for the average case. Yes, that is what veterinary work often is. You see enough loss, you learn to protect a man from spending himself on it. Art nodded. Pike looked toward the cake table, then back at him. But you were not treating an average case. You were treating the animal in front of you, and you were willing to pay for enough time to know the difference. Art said nothing. Pike put out his hand. I missed that, he said. Art shook his hand. You didn't miss it, Art said. You couldn't see it yet. Pike held the handshake a moment longer. That may be worse, he said. No, Art said. That may be human. Cricket lived 9 years. Art was with her at the end, in the same farrowing house where she had first been carried back from the edge of a decision. Old by then, heavy through the shoulder, stiff in the hips, and no longer the animal that had once made men lean over gates and revise themselves. But there was still traces, the watchful eyes, the steady breath, the habit of lifting her head when Art entered, as if she were measuring what kind of day he had brought with him. After she was gone, Art stood in the feed room and looked at the nail where the first small bottle had hung for years after it was no longer needed. The bottle was cloudy from washing, the nipple long since cracked and useless. Clara had wanted to throw it away twice. Art had said, "Not yet." That evening, he put the bottle in a cigar box with the first notebook. On the inside cover, the old line was still there. The scale tells you the start. It does not get to tell you the finish. Under it, in Art's older handwriting, was another line he had added some time after the drought. But a man can accidentally let it. By the time Art's granddaughter Leah took over part of the sow records in 1994, the cricket line had spread through 8 farms, not because a company had branded it, and not because the county paper had made it into a miracle, but because farmers had seen the proof in farrowing crates and weaning pens, where proof is hard to fake. Leah was 19, home from technical college on weekends, and impatient in the way good young farmers often are. Added software, printouts, and better heat controls. Art had no objection to any of it. He was not against new things. He was against new things that made men stop looking. One afternoon, Leah found the cigar box while cleaning the feed room cabinet. She brought the bottle and notebook to Art. "This was hers?" she asked. Art was sitting on an overturned bucket, repairing a latch. "Yes." "The Runt?" "Yes." "The one Dr. Pike said to Cull?" Art looked at the bottle, then at the notebook, then through the open door toward the sow barn where 3 of Cricket's granddaughters were due within the week. "Yes." Leah opened the notebook and read the first page. 2 pounds, 6 ounces. G. 2 pounds, 6 ounces. Fed 7:10. Fed 10:05. Weak suck. Warm towel. Still trying. She read for a long time. Then she said, "You really wrote down, 'Still trying.'" Art smiled a little. "I was writing what mattered." Leah closed the notebook carefully. Outside, a sow knocked against a gate, and the whole barn answered in that irritated chorus of living animals who expect a farmer to come when something needs doing. Leah looked toward the sound. "So, what's the rule?" she asked. Art stood slowly, because age makes every lesson wait for the knees. "The rule is not that every runt is special," he said. He took the notebook from her and tapped the page. "That would be foolish." Leah waited. "The rule is this," Art said. "A first measurement is not a verdict. It is only a place to begin looking." He handed the notebook back to her. "And if you stop looking too early, you do not prove the animal was worthless. You only prove you were done." Leah wrote that line on a card and pinned it to the inside of the feed-room cabinet. Years later, when Art was gone, the card was still there. The handwriting had faded. The cabinet door had swollen from damp. The barn had new fans, new controls, new records and equipment Art would have pretended to distrust before asking exactly how it worked. But the card stayed, not because it was sentimental, because it was operational. It told every person who opened that cabinet what kind of farm they were standing in. A farm where numbers mattered. A farm where experts were listened to. A farm where bad odds were taken seriously. And still, a farm where no one mistook the first number for the whole truth. Because the scale tells you the start, it does not get to tell you the finish.